In the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, the plaintiff, Securities and Exchange Commission versus the defendants, Richard J. SCHUELER, also known as Richard Hart, Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX, Civil Action Number 1, 23 CV 5749. Complaint. Plaintiff Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, alleges 1. Richard SCHUELER, also known as Richard Hart, is an American-born internet marketer, content creator, and serial entrepreneur living in Finland. Hart operates through 3 unincorporated alter ego entities, Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX. Beginning in December 2019 and continuing for at least the next 3 years, Hart raised more than $1 billion in the unregistered offer and sale of crypto asset securities to retail investors in the U.S. and abroad. Hart engaged in 3 separate offerings, Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX. Each was and is a crypto asset security, and PULSECHAIN and PULSEX are crypto asset security platforms designed, created, and maintained by Hart. Hart continually touted these investments as a pathway to grandiose wealth for investors, claiming that Hex, for example, was built to be the highest appreciating asset that has ever existed in the history of man. Hart hired and directed developers to build and maintain the software framework to support Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX. Although Hart claimed these investments were for the vague purpose of supporting free speech, he did not disclose that he used millions of dollars of PULSECHAIN investor funds to buy luxury goods for himself. Hart, Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX violated the federal securities laws through the unregistered offer and sale of securities. Additionally, through the misappropriation of investor assets, Hart and PULSECHAIN defrauded their investors. 2. Beginning in December 2019, Hart offered and sold Hex tokens, promising investors many incentives and bonuses, while marketing Hex as the first high-yield blockchain certificate of deposit launched on the Ethereum network. Additionally, Hart touted a Hex feature that he developed and dubbed staking, which he described as allowing Hex investors to lock up their Hex tokens for a designated period of time in return for additional Hex tokens at the end of their lockup period. Hart claimed that investors who participated in the so-called staking of Hex tokens could earn an average of 38% annual return in the form of additional Hex tokens. 3. Between December 2019 and November 2020, Hart, via the Hex public wallet address, accepted more than 2.3 million Ether, ETH, putatively from investors, worth more than $678 million at the time of deposits. In exchange for their investment, Hart issued Hex tokens to investors. It appears that between 94 to 97% of these ETH deposits, however, were recycling transactions directed by Hart or other insiders, which enabled Hart or other insiders to gain control of a large number of Hex tokens while creating the false impression of significant trading volume and organic demand for Hex tokens. 4. Between July 2021 and April 2022, Hart conducted additional unregistered offerings of investments he developed called PULSECHAIN, offering PLS tokens, and PULSEX, offering PLSX tokens. For both the PULSECHAIN and PULSEX offerings, Hart urged investors to invest by depositing their crypto assets to the PULSECHAIN and PULSEX public wallet addresses in exchange for a promise to deliver PLS and PLSX tokens in the future. 5. Investors invested more than $354 million by depositing their crypto assets to the PULSECHAIN public wallet address in exchange for the promise of future delivery of PLS tokens. In connection with PULSEX, investors invested more than $676 million by depositing their crypto assets to the PULSEX public wallet address in exchange for the promise of future delivery of PLSX tokens. 6. Hart is familiar with the U.S. securities laws and the test established in SEC v. W.J. Howey Company, 328 U.S. 293, 1946, for determining what is and is not a security specifically. So he frequently makes veiled references about why investors can expect profits while also making tongue-in-cheek disavowals. But his efforts to obfuscate are unavailing. Each of the Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX offerings involved investments of money in common enterprises with the reasonable expectation of profits to be derived based on the efforts of others. Accordingly, the Hex, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX offerings were securities offerings. At no time did Hart or anyone else associated with these offerings register the Hex, PULSECHAIN, or PULSEX offerings with the Commission. 7. Additionally, Hart and PULSECHAIN defrauded investors by misappropriating at least $12.1 million of PULSECHAIN investor funds. Instead of using these investor funds to develop and market the PULSECHAIN network, or even to fulfill Hart's explicit statement that invested funds supported freedom of speech, Hart and PULSECHAIN used at least $12.1 million of investor funds for Hart's personal luxury purchases, including a 555-carat diamond, expensive watches, and high-end automobiles. 8. Through their actions, defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN violated, and unless enjoined will continue to violate, the anti-fraud provisions of the federal securities laws, namely Section 10(b) of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 78JB, and Rules 10b-5a and c, thereunder 17 CFR Section 240, 10b-5a and c, and Section 17A1 and 3 of the Securities Act of 1933, Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77Q(a)(1) and 3. 9. Additionally, through their actions, all defendants violated, and unless enjoined will continue to violate, the securities registration provisions of the federal securities laws, namely Sections 5A and 5C of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77E, A, and C. 10. To protect the public from further harm and fraudulent activity, the SEC brings this action against defendants and seeks 1. Permanent injunctive relief, 2. Disgorgement of ill-gotten gains plus prejudgment interest, and 3. Civil penalties. Next section, defendants. 11. Richard J. SCHUELER, also known as Richard Hart, age 43, is a U.S. citizen who, upon information and belief, currently resides in Finland. He is the founder of HEX, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX. 12. HEX is an ERC-20 token and an unincorporated entity established by Hart, which serves as an alter ego entity for Hart. Hart operates HEX's websites at hex.com, HEXWin, and ethx.com. Offerings for and sales of HEX or HEX tokens have not been registered with the Commission. Side note, ERC-20 is a technical standard that defines how so-called fungible tokens operate on the Ethereum blockchains. 13. PULSECHAIN purports to be an Ethereum fork and Layer 1 blockchain that Hart released on May 12, 2023. PULSECHAIN is an unincorporated entity established by Hart that serves as an alter ego entity for Hart. Hart operates PULSECHAIN's website at pulsechain.com. Pulse, PLS, is the native token for PULSECHAIN. Offerings for and sales of PULSECHAIN and PLS tokens have not been registered with the Commission. 14. PULSEX is a self-described, decentralized protocol on the Ethereum blockchain that Hart developed to serve as PULSECHAIN's so-called decentralized crypto asset trading platform through a fork of the Uniswap platform. Rather than employing a traditional order book and matching engine to execute orders for securities, Uniswap's core feature is an automated market maker, a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain that allows liquidity providers to pool assets for sale and allows people to purchase those assets from the pools. Hart deployed PULSEX on May 12, 2023. PULSEX is an unincorporated entity established by Hart that serves as an alter ego entity for Hart. Hart also operates a website for PULSEX at pulsex.com. PULSEX, PLSX, is the native token for PULSEX. Offerings for and sales of PULSEX and PLSX tokens have not been registered with the Commission. Next section, jurisdiction and venue. 15. The Commission brings this action pursuant to authority conferred upon it by Sections 20B and 20D of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Sections 77TB and 77TD, and Sections 21D and 21E of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Sections 78UD and 78UE. 16. This Court has jurisdiction over this action pursuant to Section 22A of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C., Section 77 volts A, and Sections 21D, 21E, and 27 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 78UD, E, and 78AA. 17. In connection with the conduct described in this complaint, defendants, directly or indirectly, made use of the mails or the means or instruments of transportation or communication in interstate commerce, including but not limited to email, wiring of funds, and use of brokerage accounts. 18. Venue is proper in this district because many of the crypto asset transactions described herein took place on Uniswap, a so-called decentralized crypto asset trading platform whose developers are headquartered in Brooklyn. Hart specifically designed PULSEX as a fork of Uniswap. Additionally, at least one investor of PULSECHAIN and PULSEX resides in this district. Next section, factual allegations. Point 1, Hart. 19. Richard Hart was born Richard J. SCHUELER and raised in Florida. Hart is an internet marketer and prolific content creator who claims to have founded and managed several successful internet startups, including a business he claims employed 150 people and had $60 million in annual sales. Point 2, HEX. Hart's development and promotion of HEX. 20. Hart is the founder and creator of HEX and the HEX token, a crypto asset security he designed to operate on the Ethereum network. Hart has often touted HEX as the first high-yield blockchain certificate of deposit. Hart first marketed HEX to public investors at a Crypto Finance Live conference in November 2018, more than a year before his first sales of HEX tokens. Hart was the sole promoter of HEX and appeared on several online platforms to promote it before he launched the offering of HEX tokens. Hart promoted HEX, the contract code, various incentive and referral bonuses, and HEX's so-called staking feature across multiple online and social media platforms, but particularly in YouTube live stream videos. Hart continued to market HEX throughout 2019 and during his offer and sale of HEX tokens, which commenced on or about December 3, 2019, and continued through at least November 19, 2020, the HEX offering. Investors reasonably expected to derive profits from HEX tokens. Side note, certain blockchains have the ability to run self-executing computer programs known colloquially as smart contracts that perform certain functions when predetermined conditions are met. 21. HEX investors could derive increased value by holding their HEX tokens and waiting for them to appreciate based on principles of supply and demand, or by trading them, but Hart designed HEX so that the tokens had an additional benefit, a so-called staking option that would allow investors to lock up their HEX tokens in order to receive additional HEX tokens in the future, depending on a number of factors, including the duration of the token holder's so-called stake. HEX's so-called staking mechanism does not involve validating transactions on the blockchain. On the Hex.com website, Hart analogized his so-called staking process to conventional interest payments and investment returns. 22. Hart told potential investors on many occasions, including via several YouTube live streams, that HEX investors could stake their HEX tokens through a process in which the tokens are sent to the Ethereum blockchain's Genesis address. That address has no owner, and therefore assets that are sent to it cannot be transferred out. In exchange for investors locking up their HEX tokens, Hart promised that the HEX smart contract would pay the investors' investment returns in the form of additional HEX tokens to be delivered in the future. Hart has repeatedly explained, including during a YouTube live stream interview in December 2019, that the purpose of this form of purported staking was to incentivize investors to lock up their HEX tokens, which reduced the number of HEX tokens in circulation, to drive up their price. Hart and HEX repeatedly advertised, including on Hex.com social media and in interviews, that investors would receive an average investment return of 38% in exchange for so-called staking their HEX tokens. 23. Hart explained that this self-described staking protocol benefited all holders of HEX tokens by increasing the token price based on supply and demand principles. Hart emphasized that investors would profit from HEX tokens. 24. Hart has repeatedly made statements on Hex.com and social media that would lead potential investors to believe that they would profit from an investment in HEX. For example, Hart often promoted HEX on social media. Leading up to the HEX offering, Hart touted on a November 8, 2019 YouTube live stream that, "If you want to get rich, HEX is built for that," a refrain that he would repeat many times. 25. Hart pumped HEX's capacity for investment gain, claiming at Hex.com until at least November 1, 2020, that HEX is designed to surpass ETH, which did 10,000x in 2.5 years. It's working. So far, HEX's USD price went up 115x in 129 days. On December 2, 2019, During a 7-hour live stream on YouTube, hours before the HEX offering commenced, Hart stated that HEX was built to outperform Ethereum and Bitcoin and all other cryptocurrencies. Hart added that HEX was built to be the highest appreciating asset that has ever existed in the history of man. That's the design intention. Hart personally undertook efforts he claimed would make HEX successful. 26. From the outset, Hart controlled and continues to control nearly all aspects of the HEX ecosystem. In a November 17, 2019 live stream on YouTube, Hart shared with potential investors how-to videos that he created to explain how investors could 1. Purchase HEX tokens during the offering period, and 2. Stake their HEX tokens. In that live stream, Hart also shared additional efforts he was undertaking, including the creation of more walkthrough videos and ringing up some more exchanges and whales he knows in order to make the HEX launch successful. In the same video, Hart disclosed that he directed certain developers to work on the HEX code to the extent that their work benefited the ecosystem. 27. In a November 12, 2020 YouTube live stream, Hart was asked how much of his time was going towards HEX. Hart stated, almost all of it. As recently as the January 2023 HEX conference, which was virtual and available on YouTube, Hart stated regarding HEX, I want to have the best performing asset that's ever existed. I want to be the best crypto founder that's ever existed. I like owning the world's largest diamond. I like having a coin that went up 1,000,000% that's had 3 years of flawless operation, that's never been hacked. The front end has never gone down. 28. In an earlier YouTube live stream on July 16, 2019, Hart admitted how important his efforts were to ensuring that the HEX token, once launched, would be available for trading on so-called crypto asset trading platforms. He promised that he was going to personally call everyone and see where he can get HEX listed. In fact, before the close of the HEX offering, Hart contacted representatives of a so-called crypto asset trading platform at least twice through private Twitter messages. In those messages, Hart discussed the potential promotion of HEX tokens on the platform through Twitter and also commented on HEX being the #1 volume liquidity pool on the platform. It appears that on December 15, 2019, the platform began listing HEX's tokens on its so-called decentralized crypto asset trading platform as a result of Hart's direct efforts. Side note, a liquidity pool is a collection of crypto assets grouped into a smart contract to facilitate trades on a blockchain network. Section B, the HEX offering. 29. From December 3, 2019 through at least November 19, 2020, the HEX offering period, HEX and Hart offered and sold HEX tokens to investors in exchange for ETH. As part of the HEX offering, HEX and Hart accepted investments of ETH from the public, including from investors in the United States, and delivered HEX tokens in return. 30. During the HEX offering period, investors purchased HEX tokens by transferring ETH to a HEX wallet address on the Ethereum blockchain. This wallet is known as the HEX contract address, HEX CA. Hart provided the HEX CA to developers so that it would be programmed into HEX's contract code. Initially, investors who wanted to obtain HEX tokens purchased them through an online portal called the Adoption Amplifier. Hart designed, controlled, and promoted the Adoption Amplifier to potential HEX investors, and Hart oversaw the development of HEX's code in its smart contract. 31. Hart publicly claimed that he relied on game theory in designing the purchase process for HEX tokens to reward larger, longer, and earlier investments. For example, HEX and Hart made available only a predetermined number of HEX tokens for purchase each day. For the first day of the HEX offering period, the predetermined number was 1 billion HEX tokens. Investors who wanted to purchase HEX tokens sent their ETH to the HEX CA, and HEX tokens were distributed to these investors based on 1. How much total ETH the investors sent to the HEX CA on that particular day, and 2. The predetermined amount of HEX tokens that Hart and HEX made available that day. Hart designed incentives to generate investor interest. 32. During the HEX offering period, Hart designed and implemented many incentives and bonuses to lure investors, including the promise of additional future HEX tokens. For example, Hart used bonus payments to encourage investors to increase their investments in order to make profits from the price appreciation that Hart told investors to expect. Hex.com promoted the Hex ecosystem and at least through November 25, 2020 stated, Hex aligns incentives, so the more people that participate, the better everyone does. 33. Hart conducted 2 separate airdrops during the Hex offering period to generate additional investor interest by promoting Hex to the broader crypto asset market. Via these airdrops, Hart directed Hex developers to deposit Hex tokens into a large number of wallets that he identified as significant holders of Bitcoin, even though the people controlling those Bitcoin wallets had not requested Hex tokens. Hart orchestrated a similar airdrop on a later date to a list of wallet addresses that Hart identified as large holders of ETH. If those wallet holders accepted the airdropped Hex tokens from Hex, Hart required that 90% of those Hex tokens be staked in the process described in more detail in paragraphs 44 to 49 below. Hart pooled the investor funds. Side note: in the crypto asset space, an airdrop typically refers to the distribution of crypto assets to certain recipients, purportedly without requiring them to pay cash consideration to receive the asset. On blockchains, typically a wallet automatically receives crypto assets sent to it without the owner having to take any steps to accept that new asset. Hart employed a variation on the typical airdrop, requiring a large portion of the tokens to be staked. 34. Hart conducted the Hex offering worldwide via the internet with no restrictions on who could access the Hex.com and HexWin websites. During the Hex offering, there were more than 2,371,362 ETH deposits to the Hex CA, totaling approximately 1.3 million transactions. These transactions can be traced to at least 21,156 identifiable wallet addresses, including wallet addresses that belong to investors in the United States. 35. Upon receipt of ETH from investors, Hex and Hart pooled these investor crypto assets into the same wallet address, the Hex CA. Hart specifically directed his developers to program the Hex code to create the pooling of crypto assets received from investors. Hart directed that Hex's code include a function that flushed, or automatically transferred, all of these pooled investor crypto assets out of the Hex CA to a separate private wallet address that Hart also provided to the Hex developers. This wallet address was referred to as the Hex Flush address. 36. Before he began selling Hex tokens, Hart provided his developers with both the Hex CA and the Hex Flush address and instructed them on the flow of invested funds out of the Hex CA and into the Hex Flush address. It appears that Hart owns and controls both the Hex CA and the Hex Flush address. 37. After the more than 2.3 million ETH, see paragraph 34 above, was deposited to the Hex CA and transferred to the Hex Flush address, the ETH was subsequently sent on through a number of transactions, typically involving a series of intermediary addresses, to a so-called crypto asset trading platform. Then, the ETH was sent back to the Hex CA through another series of transactions involving intermediary addresses. An analysis of these repetitive ETH transactions into the Hex CA indicates that approximately 94 to 97% of the ETH deposited into the Hex CA was recycled through the so-called crypto asset trading platform. This created the inaccurate appearance that there was significant organic demand for Hex tokens. The series of transactions and the use of intermediaries obscured that 94 to 97% of ETH deposits was directed from the Hex Flush address back to the Hex CA as seemingly new investments by unrelated investors. Section C. Hex and Hart continued to promote and develop the Hex ecosystem after the Hex offering. 38. After the Hex offering concluded in November 2020, Hart continued to engage in extensive marketing efforts and social media campaigns to promote Hex, because Hex's success is, and has been, dependent on Hart's efforts and his maintenance of the Hex ecosystem and secondary market demand. 39. After the Hex offering concluded, Hex and Hart continued to make public statements extolling the value of Hex tokens. For example, Hex's website currently states, Hex has already done a 10,000x in under 2 years. The price of Hex appreciated faster than anything else. Hex's price went up 1,401x against Bitcoin and 361x against Ethereum. And Hex's primary design intention is price appreciation. 40. Similarly, after the HEX offering concluded, Hart continued to tout to investors HEX's so-called staking feature and to develop HEX's secondary market, including through multiple websites that he owns and controls, including Hex.com, HexWin, and FX.com, and on social media, including YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. 41. Since the HEX offering closed, HEX investors can only purchase HEX tokens from third parties on various centralized and so-called decentralized crypto asset trading platforms. Hart's entrepreneurial efforts continued as he instructed potential investors to do the following. 1. Download and install a crypto asset browser extension that allows investors to store and manage their investments in HEX tokens. 2. Purchase ETH using the browser extension via 2 online crypto asset trading platforms. 3. Visit FX.com, a domain that Hart controls and pays for, where investors are further directed on how to exchange their ETH for HEX tokens sold by secondary market participants. And 4. Stake their HEX tokens by visiting go.hex.com, which is discussed further below in paragraphs 44 to 49. Most secondary market transactions in HEX tokens occur on Uniswap, a self-described decentralized crypto asset trading platform whose developers are headquartered in Brooklyn. 42. In a continued effort to build the HEX ecosystem and sustain a market for the exchange of HEX tokens, Hart developed FX.com, a website interface that allows investors to engage in secondary market purchases of HEX tokens directly through Uniswap. 43. As described in paragraph 72 below, Hart also touted to investors that the launch of PULSECHAIN and PULSEX would lead to an increase in profits for HEX investors. Section D. Hart developed a so-called staking feature designed to deliver additional profits to investors. 44. Leading up to, during, and after the HEX offering period, Hart heavily marketed HEX's alleged staking feature, which he designed. In touting HEX's so-called staking feature, Hart frequently marketed HEX as the first high-interest or high-yield blockchain certificate of deposit launched on the Ethereum network. In so doing, Hart and HEX created a reasonable expectation of profits, independent of any effort by investors. 45. Hart designed the so-called staking feature of the HEX ecosystem, whereby HEX investors were and are encouraged to lock up their HEX tokens for a designated period of time in exchange for the promise of receiving additional HEX tokens in the future, that is, a return on their investments. HEX investors can lock up their HEX tokens for periods ranging from 1 day to 15 years through a software extension. HEX investors purportedly lock up their HEX tokens by sending them to the Ethereum blockchain's Genesis address. In the HEX ecosystem, Hart's form of staking purportedly removes HEX tokens from circulation and thereby, according to Hart, increases the price of the HEX token based on general principles of supply and demand. 46. Based on several factors, including the length of time that a HEX investor stakes their HEX tokens, Hart programmed the HEX smart contract to pay investors new HEX tokens, amounting to the number of tokens the investor staked, plus accrued interest, calculated daily but not paid out until the end of the lockup period. Hart has repeatedly claimed at Hex.com, in online interviews and on Twitter that HEX stakers will receive an average annual return of 38% for their stake. Hart has claimed on YouTube and Twitter that approximately 10% of HEX token holders have staked their HEX tokens. 47. During the HEX offering period, Hart also touted a rewards program called Big Payday, in which he distributed unclaimed HEX tokens, plus other types of bonuses at the close of the offering to investors who staked their HEX tokens. These unclaimed HEX tokens were distributed to stakers based on the length of their lockup period, with preference given to longer periods, and the number of HEX tokens they staked. On November 18, 2020, just before the HEX offering closed, HEX announced that the HEX tokens distributed via the Big Payday event were worth at least $1 billion. 48. In a November 27, 2019 interview live-streamed on YouTube shortly before the HEX offering, Hart described the so-called staking feature as virtual lending within the HEX ecosystem, saying that when people stake their coins, the supply has reduced, which means that everyone that hasn't staked their coins just virtually borrowed the money. If you're holding an unstaked HEX, every time someone else stakes the HEX, your HEX that you can trade and sell for fiat, it goes up in value. 49. Throughout the relevant time period, Hart has emphasized that the principles of supply and demand create a direct relationship between the number of staked tokens and the market value of HEX tokens. For example, on December 2nd, 2019, Hart emphasized on YouTube how his so-called staking program would benefit all HEX token holders. But in HEX, when people lock up their coins, and that is what caused the price to go up, then the market cap will go down, which gives you more room to grow. And then you could just keep building appreciations and mad gains. The Hex.com website currently states that by staking their HEX, stakers reduce the supply, which puts upwards pressure of HEX's price. Section 3, PULSECHAIN development and offering. 51. PULSECHAIN, which Hart publicly claimed would be a fork of the Ethereum network. The PULSECHAIN website, PULSECHAIN.com, which Hart controls, describes PULSECHAIN as having cheaper gas fees and being 4 times faster than the Ethereum network. Between July 15, 2021 and August 3, 2021, the PULSECHAIN offering period, Hart orchestrated an offering to raise investor funds to develop PULSECHAIN. During the PULSECHAIN offering period, Hart and PULSECHAIN instructed investors to invest in PULSECHAIN by, as Hart called it, depositing various forms of crypto assets, including ETH and others, to the PULSECHAIN sacrifice address, PULSECHAIN SA. Through PULSECHAIN's website, Hart instructed investors on how to sacrifice their crypto assets to purchase Pulse, PLS, PULSECHAIN's native token. Side notes, a gas fee refers to the fee required to conduct transactions or execute contracts on the network. The PULSECHAIN offering period was unofficially extended until at least approximately April 6, 2022, to allow Hart to continue accepting investor assets. 52. In exchange for an investment, a deposit of crypto assets, Hart promised to deliver PLS tokens to the investor in the future, tied to the amount of the investor's investment, the PULSECHAIN offering. Hart represented that the calculation of the promised number of PLS tokens to be delivered to an investor was based in part on A, the amount of the investor's investment or sacrifice of crypto assets, and B, how early in the PULSECHAIN offering period the investment took place. As a result, Hart incentivized investors to invest in PULSECHAIN early. 53. PLS tokens were delivered to investors on or about May 12, 2023, when PULSECHAIN was deployed publicly, or as Hart described, available on mainnet. 54. According to Hart and PULSECHAIN, because PLS tokens must be used for gas or transaction fees on PULSECHAIN, PLS investors could make a profit from that demand simply by holding PLS. Hart frequently stated that the purpose of PULSECHAIN was to save HEX token holders from the high gas fees they were being forced to pay for HEX transactions on Ethereum. Upon PULSECHAIN's release, PULSECHAIN investors received a PULSECHAIN-compatible copy of all their Ethereum network crypto assets through an airdrop, in addition to the newly issued PLS tokens described above in paragraphs 51 to 53. 55. To date, more than 59,000 deposits to the PULSECHAIN SA have been identified, reflecting more than $354 million of crypto assets invested in PULSECHAIN, including crypto assets invested by investors in the United States. Neither Hart nor PULSECHAIN has registered the PULSECHAIN offering with the Commission. Part B. Hart emphasized that investors would profit from PLS tokens and directly tied the value of the PLS tokens to the development of PULSECHAIN. 56. On the PULSECHAIN website that he controls and in a May 16, 2021 live stream on his YouTube channel, Hart touted the various benefits and value of PULSECHAIN, including that it purportedly has faster transaction times and cheaper gas fees than Ethereum. Hart indicated that PLS investors would profit from the transaction fees paid for crypto asset transactions on PULSECHAIN. 57. PULSECHAIN operates by purportedly paying 75% of all PLS tokens generated through gas fees to PLS validators. The other 25% of the fees are sent to the Ethereum blockchain's Genesis address. Any PLS investor can become a validator by staking or locking up 5 million PLS tokens. Side note, in a blockchain network, a validator is a participant that is responsible for validating new transactions and maintaining the security of the blockchain. 58. Similar to the HEX offering, Hart told PulseChain investors during the PulseChain offering period that they could expect to make profits by investing in PulseChain. For example, on August 1st, 2021, via a YouTube video he posted during the PulseChain offering, Hart claimed that 14,000x is a reasonable estimate for what could be possible for Pulse because that's what Ethereum did, and this is a very similar thing but better. 59. At the 2023 HEX conference on January 9, 2023, 4 months before the release of PulseChain, Hart explicitly referred to the value of PulseChain as a return on investment, using the phrase ROI. Hart stated, PulseChain's going to launch at zero. It's pretty hard to beat the ROI of something that goes from zero to anything because, in theory, it's like infinite ROI. 60. PLS tokens derive their value from Hart's efforts in developing and releasing PulseChain and in making it successful. In fact, investors did not receive their PLS tokens until PulseChain was released on May 12, 2023, almost 2 years after the end of the official PulseChain offering period. One PulseChain investor who resides in Brooklyn confirmed that he invested in PulseChain because he believed he would receive PLS tokens in exchange for his investment and that he expected, based on Hart's statements, that the PLS tokens would increase in value. Part C. Hart misappropriated PulseChain investor funds. 61. During the PulseChain offering period as extended, investors invested more than $354 million of crypto assets in PulseChain. Between July 15, 2021 and March 3, 2022, however, it appears as if Hart transferred or directed the transfer of approximately $217 million in PulseChain offering proceeds consisting of various crypto assets, ETH, DAI, USDC, and Tether, from the PulseChain SA to a privately held wallet. On January 26, 2022, after the official closing of the PulseChain offering, more than $26.5 million of Tether was transferred from the private wallet in 22 back-and-forth transactions, resulting in approximately $26 million in ETH being deposited to the private wallet. Next, it appears as if Hart transferred or directed the transfer of $26 million in ETH through a crypto asset mixer that facilitates anonymous transactions by obfuscating their origin, destination, and counterparties, and then through at least 50 intermediary wallets before ending up on 3 purported crypto asset platforms. As discussed below in paragraphs 62 to 63, it appears that Hart controlled and ultimately benefited, in the form of luxury purchases, from these transactions. Notably, Hart previously discussed his familiarity with the mixer in a December 2, 2019 live stream video on YouTube and highlighted its purported anonymity protections. 62. Following the mixer transactions, Hart misappropriated at least $12.1 million of PulseChain investor assets between August 3, 2021 and September 22, 2022 to fund his purchases of luxury goods, including cars and watches. For example, on August 3, 2021, Hart spent $337,642 of PulseChain investor assets on the purchase of a luxury car from a European luxury car dealer. On August 24, 2021, Hart transferred another $534,916 to the same luxury car dealer for the purchase of a McLaren sports car. On August 29, 2021, Hart purchased a 2020 white Ferrari Roma for $314,125. From January 2022 through March 2022, Hart also purchased 5 watches in separate transactions. Hart's first purchase on January 20, 2022 included 1. A $285,799 Rolex Submariner Oyster, 2. A $550,000 Rolex Daytona Eye of the Tiger, and 3. A $800,000 Rolex GMT Master 2. On April 5, 2022, Hart spent an additional $1.38 million to purchase another Rolex watch. On April 10, 2022, Hart spent $419,192 of PulseChain investor assets to purchase another watch. Collectively, from the mixer transactions alone, Hart spent nearly $7.2 million of PulseChain investor assets on luxury watches and high-end automobiles that he purchased in the United States, Finland, and Estonia. 63. In additional transactions occurring after the mixer transfers, Hart misappropriated approximately $5 million of PULSECHAIN investor assets, sending a majority of the assets to Sotheby's in February 2022 to purchase a 555-carat black diamond called the Enigma, purportedly the largest black diamond in the world. Hart purchased the diamond for £3,161,000, $4.28 million at the time of the transaction, funding the purchase by transferring both ETH and fiat currency to Sotheby's. 64. Often discussing the development work surrounding PULSECHAIN, Hart gave investors a reasonable expectation that their funds would be used to develop PULSECHAIN. He also tied investors' receipt of PLS tokens to the ultimate release of PULSECHAIN, leading a reasonable investor to believe that PULSECHAIN investor assets would be used to develop PULSECHAIN. At least one Brooklyn investor in PULSECHAIN has confirmed that he believed his investment would be used to develop PULSECHAIN. 65. In a January 16, 2022 YouTube live stream, Hart described the work that he and his developers had done and were doing, as well as work that remained to be done to bring PULSECHAIN and PLS out of the testing phase and into mainnet launch phase. Reasonable investors rightfully expected that if the PULSECHAIN network was not finished and thereafter maintained by Hart and his team of developers, it would collapse along with the value of PLS. 66. Hart frequently claimed that an investment in PULSECHAIN was linked to free speech, for example, stating on July 21, 2021 that you believe free speech is a protected human right and blockchains are speech, and you're sacrificing to prove that you believe that. Meanwhile, Hart never disclosed to PULSECHAIN investors that any investor assets, let alone more than $12 million, would be used to fund his purchases of personal luxury goods. Hart also never disclosed that $217 million of investor assets would be immediately transferred from the PULSECHAIN SA to the private wallet. Further, Hart used a so-called decentralized aggregator and the mixer to conceal his misappropriation of PULSECHAIN investor assets for his own personal use. Section 4. Part A. PULSECHAIN Development and Offering. 67. Around the same time that Hart started developing PULSECHAIN, he also started developing PULSEX. On the PULSEX website, PULSEX.com, which Hart owns and controls, Hart described PULSEX as a fork of Uniswap's so-called decentralized trading platform that would purportedly enable users to trade so-called PRC20 tokens offered and sold for trading on PULSECHAIN. At PULSEX.com, Hart instructed investors on how to invest in PULSEX by depositing crypto assets in exchange for PLSX, the PULSEX platform's anticipated native token, to be delivered to investors when PULSEX launched. Hart sold PLSX tokens to PULSEX investors, including U.S.-based investors, between December 29, 2021 and February 26, 2022. The offering period was unofficially extended until approximately April 6, 2022, to allow Hart to continue to accept investor assets, the PULSEX offering period. Hart pooled each investor's deposit of crypto assets in the PULSEX sacrifice address, PULSEX SA. There have been more than 120,000 deposits totaling over $676 million in multiple crypto assets to the PULSEX SA. This amount excludes any deposits of HEX tokens to the PULSEX SA, which, as discussed in paragraph 37 above, may have been held by Hart or other insiders. Side note, PRC20 is a protocol designed by Hart and his developers that governs how the PULSECHAIN network functions. 68. PULSEX.com states that PULSEX will work like Uniswap, and that every time people swap from one coin to another on PULSEX, liquidity providers earn fees as a reward in the form of PLSX. 69. On or about May 12, 2023, Hart deployed PULSEX and investors received their PLSX tokens. Part B. Hart emphasized that investors would profit from PLSX tokens and directly tied their value to the development and success of PULSECHAIN and PULSEX. 70. The PULSEX.com website states that PLSX is designed to increase in value. During a January 23, 2022 YouTube livestream, Hart claimed that in PULSEX, we have the coolest, highest liquidity automated market maker exchange. Earlier in December 2021, Hart stated that he believed PLSX tokens would appreciate and that 10,000x in 2 years is well within the realm of possibility. On April 26, 2022, Hart told one prospective New York City investor via Telegram chat that PULSEX is an exchange online where you can swap all kinds of coins on the PULSECHAIN. He claimed that 22% of the fees are used to buy and burn the PLSX token, so basically owning PLSX is similar to owning part of an exchange. In the same chat, Hart provided the prospective New York investor with step-by-step instructions on how to purchase crypto assets and then how to transfer those to PULSECHAIN and swap those tokens on PULSEX. 71. On the January 23, 2022 YouTube live stream referenced in the previous paragraph, Hart also touted PULSEX's success, claiming that it had secured about $1 billion in investments, sacrificed crypto assets. All PULSEX investor funds flowed through the PULSEX SA, a wallet address that Hart provided to developers. Overlapping with the PULSECHAIN release on March 11 and 12, 2023, over $100 million of PULSEX investor funds, nearly 25% of the total crypto assets raised excluding HEX tokens, were transferred to a privately held wallet, Private Wallet 2. It appears as if Hart directed this transfer and controls Private Wallet 2. 72. Hart actively directed development efforts for both PULSECHAIN and PULSEX and paid a team of developers. Hart tied the launch of PULSEX and PULSECHAIN to an increase in profits for HEX, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX investors. Hart noted that the investments of HEX tokens during the PULSEX offering removed hundreds of millions of dollars of HEX tokens from the circulating supply. As a result of this reduced supply of HEX tokens in circulation, Hart stated his purported belief that the price of the HEX token would appreciate. Further, in a December 24, 2021 YouTube live stream, Hart opined that, "I think HEX on Pulse is going to be more valuable than HEX on the Ethereum network." 73. Neither Hart nor PULSEX has ever registered the PULSEX offering with the Commission. Part 5. Hart often repeated false claims that his offerings were not securities offerings. 74. Although Hart frequently made superficial disclaimers about the status of his offerings under the U.S. securities laws, the economic reality of these offerings and his promotions of the offerings were contrary to these disclaimers. 75. In reality, as Hart has admitted, he sold HEX, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX as potential avenues to investor wealth, and the success of these endeavors were completely dependent on his efforts and/or the efforts of others, and not on the efforts of the investors themselves. For example, on a January 16, 2022 YouTube live stream, Hart went through a list of incomplete tasks and development milestones that he and his developers needed to complete before PULSECHAIN could be released. He also touted the development milestones he had already attained, including a months-long testing phase for features that had already been implemented in the testing space. In an October 8, 2022 YouTube live stream, Hart commented in response to requests for updates on the PULSECHAIN and PULSEX launch. "So you ain't getting any updates. It's done when it's done. Software is hard. The developers are working hard on it. That's all there is to it. You gotta wait, just like I'm waiting, except I don't cry and moan while I wait." Part 6. Current status. 76. As of June 30th, 2023, A. HEX's price was $0.008841, down from a high of 56 cents in September 2021. B. PLS's price is $0.0001024, down from a high of $0.0003193 on May 22nd, 2023. And C. PLSX's price is $0.000031112, down from a high of $0.0000136 on May 22nd, 2023. At present, PLS and PLSX are practically worthless, and HEX's value has dropped about 98.4% below its all-time high. Claims for relief. First claim for relief. Fraud in connection with the purchase or sale of a security violations of Section 10(b) of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 78 JB, and Rules 10b-5a and c, thereunder 17 CFR Section 240, 10b-5a and c, against defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN. 77. Plaintiff realleges and incorporates paragraphs 1 through 76 of this complaint by reference as if set forth verbatim in this claim. 78. By engaging in the acts and conduct alleged herein, defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN have, directly or indirectly, in connection with the purchase or sale of a security, by the use of any means or instrumentality of interstate commerce, or of the mails or of any facility of any national securities exchange, knowingly or with severe recklessness, A, employed a device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, and or B, engaged in an act, practice, or course of business which operated or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon any person. 79. By reason of the foregoing, defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN violated, and unless enjoined will continue to violate, Section 10(b) of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 78JB, and Rules 10(b)(5)(a) and C, thereunder 17 CFR Section 240, 10(b)(5)(a) and C. Second claim for relief, fraud in the offer or sale of a security violations of Section 17(a)(1) and 17(a)(3) of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77Q A1 and 3, against defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN. 80. Plaintiff realleges and incorporates paragraphs 1 through 76 of this complaint by reference as if set forth verbatim in this claim. 81. By engaging in the acts and conduct alleged herein, defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN in the offer or sale of a security by the use of any means or instruments of transportation or communication in interstate commerce, or by use of the mails directly or indirectly have, A, knowingly or with severe recklessness employed a device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, and or B, knowingly, recklessly, or negligently engaged in a transaction, practice, or course of business which operated or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon the purchaser. 82. By reason of the foregoing, defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN have violated, and unless enjoined will continue to violate, Section 17(a)(1) and 3 of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77Q(a)(1) and 3. Third claim for relief, securities registration violations. Violations of Sections 5A and C of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77E, A, and C, against all defendants. 83. Plaintiff realleges and incorporates paragraphs 1 through 76 of this complaint by reference as if set forth verbatim in this claim. 84. By engaging in the acts and conduct alleged herein, defendants directly or indirectly, A, made use of the means or instruments of transportation or communication in interstate commerce or of the mails to sell, through the use or medium of any prospectus or otherwise, securities as to which no registration statement was in effect, and or B, for the purpose of sale or delivery after sale, carried or caused to be carried through the mails or in interstate commerce by means or instruments of transportation, securities as to which no registration statement was in effect, and or C, made use of means or instruments of transportation or communication in interstate commerce or of the mails to offer to sell, through the use or medium of any prospectus or otherwise, securities as to which no registration statement had been filed. 85. There were no applicable exemptions from registration. 86. By engaging in the conduct described above, defendants have violated, and unless enjoined will continue to violate, Sections 5A and 5C of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77E, A, and C. Prayer for relief. Wherefore, the Commission respectfully requests that the Court enter a judgment. 1. Permanently enjoining defendants Hart and PULSECHAIN from violating Section 17A of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77Q, A, and Section 10B of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 78J, B, and Rule 10B5 thereunder, 17 CFR Section 240, 10B5. 2. Permanently enjoining all defendants from violating Sections 5A and 5C of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77E, A, and C. 3. Permanently barring defendants from participating directly or indirectly in the purchase, offer, or sale of any crypto asset security, or engaging in activities for purposes of inducing or attempting to induce the purchase, offer, or sale of any crypto asset security by others. 4. ordering Hart to disgorge jointly and severally with each of HEX, PULSECHAIN, and PULSEX all ill-gotten gains received as a result of the violations alleged herein, plus prejudgment interest on those amounts, pursuant to the court's equitable powers in sections 21D3, 21D5, and 21D7 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. section 78U D3, 78U D5, and 78U D7, 5, ordering the defendants to pay civil penalties pursuant to Section 20D of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 77TD, and Section 21D3 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. Section 78U D3, and 6, imposing such other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. Dated July 31st, 2023, respectfully submitted, Matthew J. Golda, Illinois, Bar, number 6272325, United States Securities and Exchange Commission.